I don't really see the point of this movement personally. I'm trying to figure it out, but I don't get it. I just don't see it and I don't back it. I think it's largely a bit wasted and a bit pointless. I wouldn't do it personally. I think if you're going to do a unilateral movement, which is technically to an extent kind of is, again, it's just not worth trying to like combo movements like this, because if anything, it actually just kind of reduces the effectiveness of that movement. Sure, it may hurt a lot. Sure, it may result in a fantastic pump, but both of those things aren't necessarily relevant for building muscle. The pump doesn't mean you've had a good workout, doesn't mean you've achieved what you're hoping to achieve, being stimulating reps. The burn also doesn't mean that either. Sensation doesn't necessarily correlate to effectiveness of movement, and those are things we've got to remember. Back in business today, and actually kind of back in business with something slightly different, because not only is it an upper body workout, shocking on this channel, I know, it's also a couples workout, which is probably going to be irrelevant. Shoulder training, tricep training, couples training, things I haven't spoken about mass amounts on the channel, but things I'm going to speak about today. But the deal is this: if at any point throughout this video you actually learn something from this video, or even potentially actually just enjoy the video, I'd appreciate it if you were to consider subscribing to the channel, but again, only if you either learn something or enjoy something. And if none of those apply, block me, because I'm not worth your time. So starting off with the shoulder press, one thing I do actually quite like about this is the fact that the seat is not directly upright. Again, preference, but I find that when the seat is just angled a little bit back, it just makes for a slightly easier movement pattern. And again, whether you shoulder press with your arms flared or slightly kind of maybe 45 degrees in front of you is completely up to you. What I would say is 45 degrees in front of you may place a bit more emphasis on the front of your delts, the anterior deltoids. A bit more flared, a bit more emphasis on the side of the old deltorunis. One thing we're going to note here is range of motion. A lot of people go about their shoulder press pretty incorrectly by limiting range of motion. Again, to the ears or below would be fantastic. What I would say is these eccentrics are a bit speedy. Sure, we know that eccentric speed is kind of irrelevant when considering building muscle, but it is pretty important when looking at standardizing technique and potentially even injury prevention, because again, if you shoot through the range of motion pretty quickly, there's probably more chance something's going to go wrong and you may hurt yourself. So I typically just say controlled eccentric, fast concentric, so slow down, fast up, and you're probably laughing. I don't really see the point of this movement personally. I'm trying to figure it out, but I don't get it. Sure, the lateral raise on one side, fantastic, love a lateral raise. But this holding the dumbbell there, I just don't see it and I don't back it. I think it's largely a bit wasted and a bit pointless. I wouldn't do it personally. I think if you're going to do a unilateral movement, which is technically to an extent kind of is, with this unilateral lateral raise, just do a unilateral movement, let the other side rest. Again, it's just not worth trying to like combo movements like this, because if anything, it actually just kind of reduces the effectiveness of that movement. Sure, it may hurt a lot. Sure, it may result in a fantastic pump, but both of those things aren't necessarily relevant for building muscle. The pump doesn't mean you've had a good workout, doesn't mean you've achieved what you're hoping to achieve, being stimulating reps. The burn also doesn't mean that either. Sensation doesn't necessarily correlate to effectiveness of movement, and those are things we've got to remember. Straight bar pushdown, fantastic. To be honest, the straight bar pushdown is an interesting one. Because of the movement itself, the limiting factors some people may struggle with is actually kind of their core. What I mean by that is when you go heavy enough, you're kind of fighting to keep yourself down and stable so aggressively, it ends up actually reducing the effectiveness of the movement, because the triceps might not be the limiting factor anymore. So you can also do it seated with the cable behind you, or you can use an attachment that might be a bit harder, like a rope. If I was looking at like really trying to be quite anal about these things, is I'd opt for like a double rope or a long rope, which allows some slight elbow flare, keeps the elbows in line or slightly behind the body, kind of brings in a bit more of the long head of the tricep. And when you're doing a push down variation, as we just saw, your priority there will be long head of the triceps. A front raise variation, again, I just personally don't really think there's a need. When you do any kind of pressing or fly movement, any chest movement, any kind of shoulder pressing, whatever it may be, you're going to heavily incorporate the anterior delts, being the front of your delts, which means most people probably have overdeveloped front delts, or at least well-developed front delts, without having to directly train them through front raise variations like we're seeing here. So you probably don't need to include them, especially if you're doing a press variation as well, unless your front delts for some reason are very underdeveloped, which is probably going to be quite rare. I'd probably skip this movement entirely. So overhead extensions like this, everyone once thought would be very long head dominant, when in reality, it's probably actually going to place a bit more emphasis on the medial and lateral head. Tricep, obviously, as I said before, means 3. You've got the long head under here, you've got the lateral head here, and you've got the medial head down here. What I would say is the speed of these reps, not ideal. Fast down, fast up. A bit more control would be great. Again, slow down, fast up would be better. Again, mainly for technical standardization. And also with overhead extensions, just make sure you're using an attachment that allows you to essentially extend in a comfortable uncomfortable position, as sometimes doing the rope attachment, because it is so narrow, may be a bit uncomfortable for some. You could use a double rope or even go separate and do katana extensions. One thing I'll quickly throw out there is link down below. If you happen to have a spare moment, you'll find a link to work with myself on a one-to-one basis where I can coach you online towards your goals, whatever they may be and whatever country you may be in. You've also got the link to the TFNL group coaching, which for less than $1 a day, you can follow a pretty bloody good program for either at home or in the gym purposes. And again, you have access to talk to me if you so wish, as well as the team. And you also have the links to the TFNL workout guides, which are very comprehensive and very easy to understand guides that have been created to help you understand what to do and also why you should be doing it. But as always, they are linked down below in the description if you fancy tickling that pickle. Face balls I think are fantastic, but not necessarily from a hypertrophy perspective. I like to include them more from like an injury prevention perspective, like maybe even a prehab perspective. That external rotation of the shoulder, that kind of this movement here, can be quite nice for the old shoulder health. And if you do a lot of pressing, then that probably isn't going to be a bad time for you, especially if you are considering something like powerlifting and whatnot. Having healthy shoulders if you're bench pressing frequently is probably going to be quite important. We've just seen a potential drop set, I believe. Yes, we have seen a drop set. Personally, I believe, in my opinion, that straight sets, just standard a set of X number of reps, is going to be more effective than a drop set. Sure, you can include a drop set if you want to, maybe if you're pressed for time, whatever it may be, but I have not included a drop set in my training for years, and I probably won't for years to come because I'm not pressed for time, and also I'm looking at optimizing the effectiveness of my workout, and I would rather stick to straight sets rather than drop sets because straight sets are probably going to be more effective. When looking at like the basics of movement selection, it actually was alright, the workout itself. We had a shoulder press pattern, I respect it. We had a lateral raise, I respect it. We had a front raise, not for me. We had a rope face pull. Again, if we look at shoulder development there, I'd probably look at like a rear delt fly instead. And we had a push down variation and an overhead extension variation. For the triceps, fantastic. For the shoulders, nearly there. When looking at shoulders, I really simplify it to this. Side raise variation, maybe a press variation as well, like a shoulder press, and a rear delt variation. For triceps, it's even more simple, a push down variation and an overhead extension variation. If you nail those things effectively, training hard, probably even just 2 sets of each, you're probably going to be fine. Just make sure you're lifting with good technique, make sure you're pushing yourself pretty hard, and make sure you're recovering well, because at the end of the day, your training program is only as effective as your recovery. If you cannot recover from what you're doing, not only are you risking injury, you're also risking progress too. One of the big things that contributes to the lack of progress and injuries is going to be over fatigue and under recovery. You may well be doing too much, and that's something to consider. As I've said many times before, training doesn't need to be complicated, and simple can often be effective, provided you're doing simple correctly. And as a whole, I think the workout itself was actually fair, like I mentioned, but there are a few things I would definitely adjust, not just from the exercise selection perspective, but also from the technical execution perspective as well. Small adjustments can make a big difference, and that's just something to consider. But again, that's just simply my opinion, like with all my videos. And I'd love to hear your opinion in the comment section below. So until the next one, thank you for tolerating me. Thank you for tolerating a shoulder and tricep workout, and thank you for tolerating the video.